I should have known something was wrong when Mrs. Chin invited me over for dinner. We'd been neighbors for 3 years, exchanging polite waves across our driveways, but she never so much as borrowed a cup of sugar. Her family was one of those picture-perfect units you see in commercials: successful surgeon husband, honor roll daughter, immaculate lawn, luxury cars that never seemed to get dirty. The invitation came on a Tuesday evening as I was dragging my garbage bins to the curb. She approached with that practiced smile I'd seen her use on other neighbors, her designer athleisure somehow making my wrinkled work clothes feel even more inadequate. "Sarah, right? I'm Lisa Chin. We should have introduced ourselves properly ages ago." Her laugh had a rehearsed quality. "Would you like to join us for dinner Friday? Nothing fancy, just getting to know our neighbors better." I almost declined. After my divorce 6 months earlier, social situations felt like wearing shoes that didn't fit. But the loneliness was getting to me, and the Chens seemed stable in a way my life hadn't been for years. Their house was exactly what I'd expected: cream walls, expensive furniture arranged with mathematical precision, family photos displaying genuine smiles that somehow felt staged. Dr. Chen greeted me with a firm handshake and offered wine from what was clearly an expensive bottle. Their daughter Emma, 16 and beautiful in that effortless way some teenagers possess, barely looked up from her phone. "Emma's been working so hard on her college applications," Lisa explained, setting down a casserole that looked like it belonged in a magazine. "She's applying to pre-med programs, following in her father's footsteps." Emma's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Mom, please." "What?" "You love biology. Remember when you were little, you used to dissect bugs in the backyard?" The conversation flowed easily enough. Dr. Chen talked about his practice. Lisa mentioned her volunteer work with the Children's Hospital Fundraising Committee. Normal, successful people living normal, successful lives. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was watching a performance. It was Emma who first cracked the facade. During dessert, she excused herself to use the bathroom and didn't return. After 20 minutes, Lisa went to check on her, and I heard raised voices from upstairs, muffled but urgent. "Everything okay?" I asked when Lisa returned alone. "Teenage hormones," she said with that same practiced laugh, but her hands were shaking slightly as she cleared the dessert plates. Dr. Chen hadn't spoken in several minutes. He sat perfectly still, staring at his untouched tiramisu, and when I followed his gaze I noticed he was looking toward the basement door. I left shortly after, thanking them for a lovely evening while Lisa walked me to the door with steps that seemed too quick, too eager to see me gone. 2 days later, I saw the ambulance. I was in my kitchen making coffee when the siren started, that particular urgent wail that makes your stomach drop. Through my window, I watched paramedics rush into the Chen house with equipment I couldn't identify. Lisa stood on the front lawn in her bathrobe, talking rapidly to a police officer while gesturing toward the house. Emma was nowhere to be seen. The ambulance left without its sirens on. In my experience, that's never a good sign. I waited an appropriate amount of time, about an hour, before walking over with a casserole of my own, the kind of gesture that gives you permission to ask questions. Lisa answered the door looking like she'd aged 5 years in 2 days. Her usually perfect hair hung limp, and there were dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. "Oh, Sarah. How thoughtful." She accepted the dish but didn't invite me in. "It's been a difficult few days. Is Emma okay?" I noticed the ambulance. Something shifted in Lisa's expression, like a mask slipping. "Emma's fine. She's staying with her aunt for a while. Just until things settle down." "And Dr. Chin?" The mask slipped further. "He's resting. Doctor's orders." But I could see into their living room over her shoulder, and everything looked exactly the same as Friday night. No signs of illness or emergency. No indication that anything had happened at all. "Well, if you need anything," I said, and Lisa nodded too quickly before closing the door. That night I couldn't sleep. Something about the whole situation felt wrong, like a puzzle with pieces that didn't fit together. I found myself standing at my bedroom window, looking across at the Chen house. Most of the lights were off, but I could see a faint glow coming from what I thought was the basement. At 2 a.m., I saw Lisa in her backyard with a shovel. What happened next changed everything. You won't want to miss how it unfolded. I told myself there were innocent explanations. Maybe she was planting something. Maybe they were having landscaping work done. Maybe I was letting my imagination run wild because I'd been watching too many crime documentaries since the divorce. But Tuesday morning, I noticed the freshly disturbed soil near their back fence. Wednesday, Emma still hadn't come home. Thursday, I realized I hadn't seen Dr. Chen at all since Sunday night. Friday, I did something I'm not proud of. I called the hospital where Dr. Chen worked, pretending to be a patient trying to schedule an appointment. "I'm sorry," the receptionist said, "but Dr. Chen isn't taking appointments at the moment. He's on extended leave for family reasons." "When did that start?" "Let me check, looks like Monday morning." "Is this urgent?" "I can refer you to another surgeon." Monday morning. The day after the ambulance. I hung up and sat in my kitchen, staring across at the Chen house. Lisa was in her garden, tending to roses with the kind of focused attention that suggested she was trying very hard not to think about something else. That afternoon, I made a decision that changed everything. I went to the police. Officer Martinez listened to my concerns with the patient expression of someone who'd heard similar stories before. Worried neighbor, recent emergency, family acting strange. He took notes, but I could tell he wasn't impressed. "Has anyone reported Dr. Chen or Emma missing?" he asked. "Well, no, but have you witnessed any actual crimes? Violence, threats, anything concrete?" "Not exactly, but the timing is suspicious. The ambulance, then Emma disappearing, then Dr. Chen not going to work." Officer Martinez closed his notebook. "Mrs. Patterson, I understand you're concerned about your neighbors, but families go through difficult times. Sometimes people need space. Dr. Chen requested leave from work. That's not unusual during a family crisis. Emma staying with relatives is perfectly normal. But what about the backyard? I saw Lisa digging." "Ma'am, it's not illegal to garden on your own property." I left the station feeling foolish and frustrated. Maybe Martinez was right. Maybe I was projecting my own chaos onto their lives, seeing problems where none existed. But that night I heard crying. It was faint, almost lost in the ambient noise of the neighborhood, but it was definitely coming from the Chen house. Not the kind of crying you do when you're sad, the kind you do when you're desperate. I grabbed a flashlight and went to my backyard, pressing my ear against the fence we shared. The sound was clearer now, and it was definitely coming from their basement. Someone was down there, and they were terrified. This is the climax. Everything you've been waiting for is right here. Stay to see the hero put everyone in their place. I should have called the police again. I should have waited for morning and tried to get Martinez to take me seriously. I should have done a lot of things differently. Instead, I climbed the fence. The Chen's backyard was darker than I'd expected, shadows cast by their perfectly manicured trees creating pockets of blackness my flashlight couldn't quite penetrate. The crying had stopped, but I could see light seeping from the basement windows at ground level. I crept closer, my heart hammering so loud I was sure someone would hear it. The basement windows were small, set high on the foundation, but I could angle myself to see inside if I crouched in their flower bed. What I saw made my blood freeze. Dr. Chen was there, but not in the way I'd expected. He was sitting in a chair, completely motionless, his head tilted at an angle that suggested he wasn't sitting there by choice. Even from my limited vantage point, I could see that something was very wrong with the way his body was positioned. Emma was there too, but she wasn't staying with her aunt. She was chained to a pipe near the furnace, her clothes dirty, her face streaked with tears. But she was alive, and when she saw movement at the window, her eyes widened with hope. And Lisa was there, pacing back and forth with something in her hands that looked like garden shears, talking to both of them in a voice too low for me to hear but with gestures that seemed increasingly agitated. I fumbled for my phone, trying to dial 911 while keeping my eyes on the scene below. But my hands were shaking so badly I kept hitting the wrong numbers, and when I finally got it right, I realized I had no signal. That's when Lisa looked up and saw me. Our eyes met through the basement window, and for a moment neither of us moved. Then she smiled, the same practiced smile she'd given me at dinner, completely incongruous with the situation, and mouthed a single word. "Wait." She disappeared from view, and I heard footsteps on the basement stairs. Heavy, purposeful footsteps coming up to the main floor. Coming to find me. I ran. I crashed through their backyard, stumbled over the fence, and burst into my own house like something was chasing me. Maybe something was. I locked every door, closed every curtain, and called 911 from my landline with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. 911, what's your emergency? My neighbor is holding her family hostage in her basement. I think her husband might be dead. The dispatcher's voice was calm, professional. What's your address, ma'am? I gave her the information, described what I'd seen, begged them to hurry. She assured me units were on the way and told me to stay inside, stay safe, stay on the line. Through my living room window, I watched the Chin house. The lights were still on, but I couldn't see any movement. No shadows passing by windows, no signs of life. The police arrived 12 minutes later, 4 cars with sirens blazing, turning our quiet suburban street into a crime scene. I watched from my window as officers surrounded the house, called for Lisa to come out, set up a perimeter. But when they finally entered the house, they found it empty. No Lisa. No Emma. No Dr. Chin. The basement showed signs of recent habitation, chains bolted to the pipe, a chair positioned exactly where I'd seen Dr. Chin, evidence that someone had been held there against their will. But whoever had been in that room was gone. Officer Martinez came to my door 3 hours later, looking tired and confused. "Mrs. Patterson, we processed the scene. There's definitely evidence that someone was being held in that basement, and we found traces of blood, but no bodies. No family." "What does that mean?" "It means you were right to call us, but we're too late. The question now is where they went." He paused, studying my face. "You said you saw Dr. Chin in the basement. Can you describe his condition?" I closed my eyes, trying to summon the image without letting it overwhelm me. "He wasn't moving. At all. His head was wrong. Like his neck was broken." Martinez wrote something in his notebook. "We'll be searching the property tomorrow, including the backyard. That area you mentioned where you saw Mrs. Chin digging." They found Dr. Chin 2 days later, buried under the rose bushes in a grave that had been carefully prepared and disguised. The medical examiner determined he'd been dead for over a week, killed sometime the weekend before our dinner party. Which meant I'd had dinner with a woman who had already killed her husband and was holding her daughter prisoner in the basement. Emma's body was never found. Lisa Chin disappeared completely. No credit card usage, no cell phone pings, no sightings despite a statewide search. She vanished as thoroughly as if she'd never existed, leaving behind only questions and the memory of that practiced smile. The house sits empty now, a crime scene take ghost in our perfect suburban neighborhood. Sometimes, late at night, I think I see lights in the basement windows. But when I look again, there's nothing there. I moved out 6 months later. Not just from the house, but from the state entirely. I needed distance from that place, from those memories, from the knowledge that I'd sat at a dinner table with a woman who was capable of things I still can't fully comprehend. But sometimes, in grocery stores or coffee shops, I see women with that same practiced smile, that same careful perfection, and I wonder what's hiding behind their basement doors. I wonder how many perfect families are performing their happiness while something unspeakable unfolds in the spaces no one thinks to look. And I wonder if Lisa Chin is somewhere out there, in another neighborhood, knocking on another lonely neighbor's door with another dinner invitation and that same practiced smile. The invitation that should never be accepted. The first red flag should have been the price. $67 for a night at the Desert Rose Motel, right off Highway 15 between Las Vegas and Los Angeles. In 2024, you can't get a decent hotel room anywhere for under 200, but desperation makes you ignore obvious warning signs. My car had broken down 3 hours outside Vegas, and the tow truck driver recommended the Desert Rose with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Clean sheets, working AC, and they don't ask too many questions, he said, which should have been the second red flag. The motel looked exactly like something from a 1970s horror movie. Single-story L-shaped building with doors that opened directly to the parking lot, neon sign flickering between Desert Rose and Desert O's, missing the R entirely. The office smelled like stale cigarettes and industrial disinfectant, presided over by a clerk who looked like he hadn't slept in decades. "How long you staying?" he asked without looking up from his crossword puzzle. "Just tonight. My car broke down." He handed me a key attached to a plastic cactus keychain. "Room 237. Ice machine's broken, but the vending machine works sometimes. Checkout's at 11, but nobody's usually here to enforce it." Room 237 was exactly what I expected. Brown carpet that had seen better decades. 2 double beds with quilts that probably harbored archaeological evidence, and a bathroom that made gas station restrooms look luxurious. But it was clean enough. The AC worked, and I just needed somewhere to sleep until the mechanic could look at my car in the morning. I was settling in, trying to get the ancient TV to pick up something other than static, when I heard voices through the thin walls. The room next door, 238, sounded like it was hosting a party. Multiple voices, laughter, music playing softly. At least someone was having a good time in this depressing place. Around midnight, I heard a knock on my door. 3 soft taps, followed by silence. I looked through the peephole but saw only empty parking lot bathed in sickly yellow light from the overhead fixtures. Maybe someone had the wrong room. The knocking came again 10 minutes later. Same pattern, 3 soft taps, then nothing. This time I opened the door with the chain still attached, peering out through the gap. A woman stood there, maybe mid-30s, wearing jeans and a Desert Rose Motel t-shirt that looked like it had been white once upon a time. "Sorry to bother you," she said, her voice slightly hoarse. "I'm Monica. I work here. We're having a little get-together in 238, and we saw your light on. Thought you might want to join us. Gets lonely on the road." Something about her smile reminded me of the tow truck driver. Friendly enough on the surface, but with an undercurrent I couldn't identify. "Thanks, but I'm pretty tired. Long day." "Of course. But if you change your mind, just knock. We'll be up for a while." I closed the door and turned the deadbolt, but curiosity got the better of me. I went to the window and carefully pulled back the curtain to look at room 238. The door was closed, but I could see light seeping around the edges, and shadows moving back and forth like there really was a party going on. At 2 a.m., the knocking started again. But this time it wasn't just my door. I could hear the same 3-tap pattern at doors all along the building. Methodical, patient knocking moving from room to room like someone was conducting a survey. I turned off my lights and watched through the curtain as Monica made her rounds. She knocked on every door with the same soft pattern, waited a moment, then moved to the next one. Most rooms were dark and didn't respond, but a few doors opened. I couldn't hear the conversations, but they were brief, and afterward those guests would emerge from their rooms and follow Monica back to 238. By 3 a.m., she'd collected 4 people. They all disappeared into room 238, and the muffled party sounds resumed. I should have minded my own business. I should have put in earplugs and gone to sleep. But something about the whole situation felt wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. The way Monica moved, the way the other guests followed her without hesitation, the fact that this obvious scam motel seemed to be hosting some kind of social gathering in the middle of nowhere. I got dressed and crept outside, keeping to the shadows between the flickering parking lot lights. Room 238 was at the corner of the L-shaped building, and there was a window on the side that faced the desert. If I could get close enough, maybe I could see what was actually going on. The window had thin curtains, but they weren't drawn completely closed. I pressed myself against the rough stucco wall and peered through the gap. What I saw made no sense at first. The room was arranged like a classroom or meeting space, with the beds pushed against the walls and folding chairs arranged in a circle. The people Monica had collected sat in those chairs, all facing inward, all completely silent and motionless. Monica stood in the center, but she wasn't talking to them. She was holding what looked like a tablet, recording them with her phone's camera. The other people, the party guests I'd heard laughing earlier, were positioned around the room with their own phones, all pointing at the seated figures. And the seated figures weren't moving at all. Not shifting in their chairs, not blinking, not breathing in any way I could detect from my vantage point. What happened next changed everything. You won't want to miss how it unfolded. I stumbled backward from the window, my mind trying to process what I'd seen. Were they unconscious? Drugged? Dead? The complete stillness of those seated figures wasn't natural, but I couldn't understand what I was looking at. That's when I noticed the smell. It was faint at first, carried on the desert wind, but unmistakable once you recognized it. Sweet and sickly, like flowers left too long in water. The smell of decay poorly masked by industrial air freshener. I needed to get back to my room, call the police, figure out what to do. But as I turned to leave, I came face to face with Monica. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, and that false smile was gone entirely now. "I thought you might be curious. People always are. I was just walking around alone at 3 a.m. in the desert." "Sure." She tilted her head, studying me. "You saw them, didn't you? Our guests." I tried to back away, but she moved with me, maintaining the same distance between us. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The people in the chairs. You're wondering why they're so still." My back hit the wall of the building. "I'm going back to my room now." "They're not sleeping," Monica continued conversationally. "They're not unconscious either. Would you like to know what they are?" I didn't answer, but she told me anyway. "They're waiting. See, we've been running this place for 3 years now, and we've learned that travelers like you, people whose cars break down, people who end up here because they have no choice, you make perfect subjects for our little project." "What project?" Her smile returned, but it was different now. Genuine in a way that made my skin crawl. "Social media content. You'd be amazed what people will pay to watch. Especially when the subjects can't object to being filmed. They're alive? Oh yes. Very much alive. Just unable to move. Unable to speak. Unable to do anything but sit there while we document their experience for our subscribers." The smell was stronger now, and I realized it wasn't coming from room 238. It was coming from all around us, from the rooms with dark windows, from the office, from the very foundations of the Desert Rose Motel. "How many?" I whispered. "People ask that a lot. The answer changes depending on how you count. Are we talking about current guests? Previous guests? The ones who've been here so long they've become part of the infrastructure?" She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small device that looked like a car key fob. "The wonderful thing about modern chemistry is how precise you can be. One click delivers just enough to paralyze without stopping the heart. 2 clicks if you want something more permanent, but we prefer our subjects lively. Better content that way." I ran. I bolted toward my room, fumbling for the plastic cactus keychain, hearing Monica's laughter behind me. But when I reached room 237, my key wouldn't work. I jammed it into the lock, twisted it every direction, but the door wouldn't open. "Having trouble?" Monica called from across the parking lot. She was walking toward me slowly, casually, like she had all the time in the world. I ran toward the office, toward the highway, toward anything that might represent escape or help. But the office was locked, the highway was a mile away through desert scrub, and my phone showed no signal. Behind me, I could hear more footsteps. Not just Monica now, but others emerging from rooms throughout the motel. The party guests, the camera operators, maybe previous victims who'd been converted into staff. I made it about halfway to the highway before they caught up. "This is the climax. Everything you've been waiting for is right here." stay to see the hero put everyone in their place. They didn't chase me with violence or drama. They simply surrounded me, a loose circle of people walking at the same unhurried pace, closing the distance gradually while Monica explained how this was going to work. The beauty of our system, she said as I slowed to a walk, realizing I was trapped, is that nobody looks for people who disappear from places like this. Broken down cars, cash payments, no reservations. You're already invisible. People will notice I'm missing. Will they? Your employer thinks you're on vacation. Your family thinks you're visiting friends. Everyone thinks someone else knows where you are. She was right, and the realization hit me like cold water. I'd taken this road trip specifically to disconnect, to get away from everyone and everything. I told different people different stories about my plans, and nobody had the complete picture. But here's the thing, Monica continued. We're not monsters. We give everyone a choice. The circle had tightened around me, but they'd stopped moving. We stood in the desert between the motel and the highway, stars brilliant overhead in the unpolluted darkness. Choice? Join our crew, or join our content. Work with us, or become the product. Most people choose to work with us once they understand the alternative. I looked around the circle of faces. In the starlight, I could see they weren't all the hollow-eyed psychopaths I'd expected. Some looked scared, conflicted, like they were as trapped as I was. What happened to the people who chose to work with you? They're standing right here, Monica said, and I realized she was right. The people surrounding me weren't evil masterminds. They were previous victims who'd made the same impossible choice I was facing now. How long? I asked. How long what? How long have you been here? Any of you? A woman to my left spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. 2 years. My car broke down just like yours. A man across from her. 18 months. I was driving to my sister's wedding. One by one, they shared their stories. Broken down cars, cancelled flights, wrong turns in the desert. All of them had ended up at the Desert Rose Motel with no good options and no one expecting them. And the people in the chairs? I asked. The ones who chose differently, Monica said simply. I thought about room 238, about those perfectly still figures, about the smell that permeated everything. How long do they stay like that? As long as the content generates revenue. Some subjects are more popular than others. We have subscribers who've been following the same person for over a year now. The horror of it settled over me like a weight. Not just the physical imprisonment, but the complete erasure of identity, agency, humanity. Reduced to content for strangers to consume. I need time to think, I said. Monica nodded. Of course. Take all the time you need. But while you're thinking, remember that the people in those chairs thought they could find a third option too. They walked me back to the motel, back to room 237. This time my key worked perfectly. They didn't lock me in or post guards. They didn't need to. Where was I going to go? I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to think of alternatives. Call the police, but with what phone signal? Run to the highway, but they'd already proven they could catch me. Try to rescue the people in room 238, but with what plan, what weapons, what hope of success? Dawn was breaking when I made my decision. I knocked on the office door, and Monica answered immediately, like she'd been waiting. I'll work with you, I said. She smiled that genuine, terrifying smile. Smart choice. Most people take longer to see reason. What do I have to do? For now, just be yourself. Wave at the tow truck drivers who bring us new guests. Knock on doors when we need fresh subjects. Smile at the camera while we document everything. And if I change my mind, then you'll find out what the chairs are really like. That was 6 months ago. I'm still here at the Desert Rose Motel, still knocking on doors with that same soft 3-tap pattern, still collecting travelers whose cars have conveniently broken down at just the right distance from our little operation. The subscribers love the content. They especially love the new interactive features, voting on which subjects get fed, which ones get bathroom breaks, which ones get to see sunlight. It's become quite the profitable enterprise. Sometimes I wonder if the tow truck driver was always part of it, if my breakdown was as random as it seemed. But mostly I try not to think about it. Thinking leads to questions, and questions lead to doubt, and doubt leads to the chairs. I've gotten good at spotting the right kind of traveler. Alone, disconnected, the type whose absence won't be immediately noticed. Last week we collected a college student whose parents think she's studying abroad. Next month we're expecting a businessman whose company thinks he's working remotely from a beach somewhere. They always ask the same questions I did. How long? How many? What choice? And I always give them the same answers Monica gave me, with that same smile that doesn't reach my eyes. But here's what I didn't tell you, what Monica doesn't know, what none of the other staff has figured out yet. I kept a record. Every name, every face, every story of the people who passed through room 238. I've been documenting everything in a way that can't be erased or edited. Because sooner or later, someone's going to come looking. Someone's going to ask the right questions, notice the right patterns, connect the right dots. And when they do, they'll need evidence. The Desert Rose Motel is still here, still operating, still collecting travelers who make the mistake of trusting a helpful tow truck driver. Room 238 still hosts its silent audience every night. And I'm still here too, knocking on doors, making that same offer Monica made to me. But every knock is also a warning, if you know how to listen. The first thing I noticed about Aunt Margie's house wasn't the peeling paint, it was the cameras. Tiny black domes mounted under every eave, watching the street with mechanical precision. For a woman living alone in rural Ohio, it seemed like overkill. She's gotten paranoid since Uncle Frank passed, Mom had explained. Just humor her, okay? She's family. I was 17 and resentful about spending spring break with a great-aunt I barely knew, but Mom needed someone to check on Margie after her hip surgery. A week helping an elderly relative beat staying home with Dad's new girlfriend. Margie answered the door before I could knock, like she'd been watching. She was smaller than I remembered, shrunken and bird-like, with silver hair pulled back and eyes that seemed too large for her face. "Danny," she said, her smile warm but not reaching those eyes. "You look just like your father at your age." The house smelled like lavender and something medical. Every surface was spotless, every magazine perfectly aligned. It felt more like a waiting room than a home. Dinner was awkward. Margie asked polite questions but kept glancing at something behind me. When I turned, I saw a small monitor displaying feeds from cameras around the house. "Security system," she explained. "After Frank died, I realized how vulnerable I was out here. All alone, no neighbors for miles." "Have you had break-ins?" Something flickered across her face. "Not exactly. But you can never be too careful." She showed me around the house but avoided certain rooms. The basement door stayed closed, and she quickened her pace past Frank's old study. That first night, I couldn't sleep. Around midnight I heard footsteps in the hallway, slow, deliberate steps that paused outside my door. "Aunt Margie?" I called softly. The footsteps stopped. "Just checking the locks, dear. Go back to sleep." But the footsteps continued for another hour, moving through the house in a pattern I couldn't understand. The next morning, Margie seemed normal but looked tired. When I mentioned exploring town, she said quickly, "There's not much to see. Better to stay here where it's safe." "Safe from what?" She turned away. "Just safer." That afternoon, while she napped, I explored the house. Most rooms were generic, but Frank's study was locked. I tried the basement door next. It opened easily. The basement was finished with wood-paneled walls, but now it was something else entirely. The walls were covered with photographs. Hundreds of them, arranged in careful rows, each labeled with dates and times. Surveillance images of people walking past the house, cars driving by, delivery trucks. But also pictures of the mailman, utility workers, neighbors from miles away. And pictures of me. Not from this visit, these photos were older. Images of me as a child during previous visits, playing in the yard, sleeping in the guest room. Photos from last Christmas. Pictures through windows, getting out of cars, some taken from inside the house while I wasn't looking. My hands shook examining the labels. Each photo was meticulously dated with notes in Margie's handwriting. Subject exhibits normal behavior. No signs of awareness. Maintains regular patterns. What happened next changed everything. You won't want to miss how it unfolded. I heard footsteps on the basement stairs. I spun around, expecting Margie, ready to demand an explanation. But it wasn't Margie coming down the stairs. It was Frank. Uncle Frank, who had supposedly died 6 months ago, who Mom had cried about at the funeral I'd missed for school. He was thinner, pale, moving carefully, but very much alive. "You shouldn't be down here," he said quietly. I couldn't speak. "You're dead," I finally managed. "That's what everyone thinks. What we needed everyone to think." "We?" Margie's voice came from behind him. "I told you to wait until tomorrow night." He wasn't ready. He found the photos, Margie. He was going to figure it out anyway. She descended, looking older but with something different in her eyes, a sharpness that hadn't been there before. "Frank had a heart attack 6 months ago," she explained, settling into an armchair. "Technically died for 4 minutes before the paramedics got him back. But during those 4 minutes something changed." "Changed how?" Frank sat on a workbench. "I could see things differently. Patterns. Connections. Threats that normal people can't perceive." "What kind of threats?" "The kind that require constant vigilance," Margie said. "The kind that make it necessary to fake your death so you can observe without interference." I looked at the hundreds of surveillance photos. "You've been watching everyone." "We've been protecting everyone," Frank corrected. "There are things happening in this town, Danny. Things most people are too blind to see." Frank moved to a filing cabinet and pulled out a folder. Inside were more photos, candid shots of people around town. The pharmacist, bank manager, school principal. But in these photos, they were doing things that looked wrong. Meetings in empty parking lots, exchanges of unmarked packages. "Everyone thinks this is a quiet little town," Frank said. "But there's a network operating here. People in positions of trust, coordinating activities that threaten the safety of families like ours." "What kind of activities?" "The kind that require children," Margie said quietly. The words hit me like ice water. I studied their faces, trying to determine if they were delusional, or if I was missing something obvious. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're family," Margie said. "Because you're old enough to understand. And because we need help." Frank pulled out another folder containing detailed maps, building layouts, schedules. "We know where they meet. We know when. We know who's involved. And tomorrow night, we're going to stop them. This is the climax. Everything you've been waiting for is right here. Stay to see the hero put everyone in their place." They laid out their plan with methodical precision. Frank had been documenting what he believed was a coordinated network of predators. Tomorrow night, key figures would gather at an abandoned warehouse. "We've been watching this location for weeks," Frank explained, spreading blueprints. "They meet every third Saturday. Same people, same routine. Have you called the police?" "The police?" Frank laughed bitterly. He spread surveillance images showing the police chief talking to the bank manager, the mayor with the school principal. "They're all connected. The whole system is compromised. So what's your plan?" "Documentation first," Frank said. "We go in with cameras, record everything, get evidence that can't be ignored. And then? Then we make sure they can never hurt anyone again." He showed me photos of children from town, school photos, playground pictures. Some faces had red X's marked over them. "Missing children," Frank explained. "Runaways, according to official reports. But look at the patterns." He showed spreadsheets tracking dates, locations. "These aren't random departures. They're systematic removals. Even if you're right, going in alone is dangerous." "Your family," Margie said firmly. Sometimes family has to do difficult things. They showed me equipment, cameras, recording devices, detailed maps. Everything meticulously planned. We just need you to watch the perimeter, Frank explained. Keep lookout. The dangerous part, getting inside, recording, that's our responsibility. The next evening, we loaded Frank's pickup with surveillance equipment and drove to the abandoned warehouse. We approached on foot through tall grass. The building was larger than expected, but there were cars in the parking lot. They're here, Frank whispered. We positioned ourselves near a loading dock. Frank and Margie prepared to go inside while I stayed hidden with a radio and backup camera. If anything goes wrong, Margie said, squeezing my hand, you run. Don't try to be a hero. Just run and make sure someone knows what we found. They disappeared into shadows, leaving me alone with my racing heart. 20 minutes later, I heard screaming. It wasn't the sound of people being hurt. It was the sound of people being terrified. Screaming, shouting, chaos erupting from inside. My radio crackled with Frank's voice. Danny, get out of here. Now. We were right about everything, but we were wrong about what they were planning to do about it. Then silence. I waited 10 minutes, torn between the promise to run and needing to know what happened. Finally, I crept closer, using my phone's camera to record. Through a broken window, I glimpsed the interior. It wasn't a meeting of predators planning crimes against children. It was a meeting of parents, teachers, and community leaders planning how to protect their children from Frank and Margie. The red X's on those photos weren't marking victims. They were marking children whose families had quietly relocated them after Frank's surveillance became too threatening. The network wasn't a conspiracy of predators. It was a support system for families protecting themselves from two elderly people whose grief and paranoia had transformed them into the very threat they believed they were fighting. Frank and Margie weren't heroes. They were the monsters everyone was afraid of. And I had helped them. I ran back to the truck and drove home, hands shaking. By the time I reached Margie's house, police cars filled the driveway. Frank and Margie were arrested that night. The investigation revealed years of stalking, harassment, and escalating threats against families throughout the county. Frank's death had been staged to allow him to operate without scrutiny. I was questioned for hours, treated initially as another victim. But as details emerged, my willing participation, my failure to report their activities, the questions became pointed. Charges were eventually dropped. I was a minor, manipulated by trusted relatives. But the weight of what I'd almost been part of never left me. Frank died in jail 3 months later, another heart attack. Margie was sentenced to psychiatric treatment. The house was sold to pay legal fees. I never saw her again. But sometimes, late at night, I wonder about the photos in that basement. The careful documentation, the absolute certainty that they were protecting innocent people from terrible threats. And I wonder how many other houses have basements full of surveillance photos, how many other elderly couples are planning interventions against dangers that exist only in their minds, how many other teenagers are being recruited into causes they don't understand until it's too late. The scariest part isn't that Frank and Margie were monsters. The scariest part is that they genuinely believed they were heroes. I should have realized something was wrong when Jessica's mom answered the door wearing latex gloves. She peeled them off with practiced efficiency, dropping them into a small waste bin by the entrance before extending her hand for a sanitized shake. "You must be Alex," she said, her smile bright but somehow rehearsed. "Jessica talks about you constantly. We're so excited to finally meet you." It was my first sleepover at Jessica's house after 3 months of friendship, and I'd been looking forward to it for weeks. She'd described her family as really close-knit, and their house as kind of old-fashioned. But standing in their immaculate foyer, I felt like I'd stepped into a museum exhibit titled Perfect American Family, circa 1995. Everything was spotless. Not just clean, spotless in a way that suggested obsessive attention to detail. The hardwood floors gleamed under soft lighting, family photos hung in perfectly aligned rows, and even the throw pillows on the couch were positioned with geometric precision. "Mom's a bit of a neat freak," Jessica said, appearing at the top of the stairs with an apologetic grin. "You'll get used to it." Mrs. Henderson laughed, but it sounded forced. "I just like things organized. It helps everyone feel comfortable and safe." Jessica's dad emerged from what looked like a home office, closing the door carefully behind him. He was tall and thin, with the kind of smile that never quite reached his eyes, the smile of someone who'd learned to perform happiness rather than feel it. "Alex! Great to meet a friend of Jessica's. How are your parents? Still living over on Maple Street?" I hadn't told Jessica my address, and we never discussed where I lived. "How did you?" "Small town," he said quickly. "Everyone knows everyone, right? Come on, let's get you settled." Dinner was served at exactly 6 p.m. on china plates that looked too expensive for everyday use. The conversation flowed smoothly, almost too smoothly, like they'd rehearsed it. Mrs. Henderson asked about my grades, my hobbies, my family's weekend plans. Mr. Henderson discussed local news with the authoritative tone of someone who kept very close tabs on community happenings. "Your friend Sarah Chin," he mentioned casually while cutting his pot roast. "Nice girl. Shame about her family moving so suddenly." I nearly choked on my water. Sarah had been my best friend until she transferred schools abruptly 2 months ago. Her parents had cited a job opportunity, but Sarah had seemed genuinely confused about the move, texting me that it all happened really fast, and she didn't understand why they had to leave immediately. "You knew Sarah?" I asked. "Like I said, small town. Her father worked at the bank with a colleague of mine. These sudden relocations happen more often than you'd think." Something about the way he said relocations made my skin crawl, but Jessica was already changing the subject, chatting about our plans for the evening. After dinner, Mrs. Henderson insisted on showing me around the house. Each room was as immaculate as the last, but I noticed details that seemed odd for a family home. Security cameras mounted in corners, motion sensors by every window, and deadbolts on doors that should have been purely decorative. "We're very security conscious," Mrs. Henderson explained when she caught me staring at the camera in the hallway. "You can never be too careful with children in the house." "Mom, you're being weird," Jessica said, but her laugh sounded nervous. "Just want our guests to feel safe, sweetheart." Jessica's bedroom was the first space that felt lived in rather than staged. Clothes scattered on the floor, homework papers spread across her desk, teenage mess that her mother had apparently allowed in this one room. But even here, I noticed a small camera positioned to monitor the window. "Your parents are really thorough," I said as Jessica closed the door. "Yeah, they worry a lot. Ever since my sister moved away for college, they've been super protective." "You have a sister?" Jessica paused, and for just a moment, her cheerful expression faltered. "Have. She's at college. In California. We don't talk much anymore." I wanted to ask more, but Jessica quickly suggested we watch a movie, and the moment passed. Around 11 p.m., I heard voices downstairs. Not conversation, something more urgent, more hushed. Jessica was asleep next to me, but the voices were clear enough to make out individual words. "The timeline. Not ready yet. Need more time to prepare." I crept to the bedroom door and opened it a crack. The voices were coming from Mr. Henderson's office, and I could see light seeping from under the door. I could hear Mrs. Henderson too, her voice sharper than it had been during dinner. "She's already asking questions about Sarah. And now she's asking about the sister. We'll handle it like we did with the others." The process works. What if she doesn't adjust as easily? They all adjust eventually. The important thing is maintaining the appearance of normalcy until the transition is complete. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure they'd hear it. What transition? What others? What had happened to Sarah Chen? I carefully closed the door and returned to the bed, but sleep was impossible. Every sound in the house seemed amplified: footsteps in the hallway, doors opening and closing, the soft beep of electronic devices I couldn't identify. At 3 a.m., I heard Jessica's bedroom door open. I kept my eyes closed, pretending to sleep, but I could sense someone standing in the doorway, watching. After what felt like an eternity, the door closed again, but I heard the soft click of a lock engaging. We were locked in. What happened next changed everything. You won't want to miss how it unfolded. I waited until I was sure Jessica was deeply asleep, then crept to the window. The backyard was illuminated by motion sensor lights, and I could see why the Hendersons needed so much security equipment. The yard wasn't just fenced, it was surrounded by what looked like a professional-grade security perimeter. Cameras, sensors, even what appeared to be some kind of electronic barrier system. This wasn't the home of security-conscious parents. This was a containment facility. I tried the bedroom door as quietly as possible. Locked, just as I'd suspected. But Jessica's room had an adjoining bathroom, and the bathroom had a small window that opened onto the roof of the garage. I needed to see what was in Mr. Henderson's office. The climb down from the bathroom window was terrifying, but adrenaline made me steadier than I should have been. The office window was on the ground floor, facing the backyard where motion sensors tracked my movement but apparently didn't trigger any alarms. Maybe they were programmed to ignore activity coming from inside the house. Through the office window, I could see Mr. Henderson's desk covered with documents and photographs. Files with names I recognized: Sarah Chin, Marcus Webb, Emma Rodriguez. Local kids who'd either moved away suddenly or transferred schools with little explanation. But it was the photographs that made my blood freeze. Pictures of Jessica's sister. Except she looked nothing like Jessica. Different hair, different facial structure, completely different ethnic background. And there were multiple versions of her, photos showing gradual changes in appearance, hairstyle, even apparent age. And then I saw the files labeled with procedure codes, medical terminology, and something that looked like a timeline for what they called integration protocols. These people weren't Jessica's parents. And Jessica wasn't Jessica. I heard footsteps approaching the office and barely had time to duck below the windowsill. Through the glass, I could see Mr. Henderson entering with a woman I didn't recognize, definitely not Mrs. Henderson. They were discussing something in urgent, professional tones. The subject is showing expected attachment patterns, the woman said, consulting a tablet. Emotional bonding with the host family unit is progressing normally. And the memory integration? Still some inconsistencies. She occasionally mentions events that don't align with the constructed history, but the discrepancies are minor and decreasing in frequency. What about the friend upstairs? That's why I'm here. We need to accelerate the timeline. She's asking too many questions, showing signs of pattern recognition. If we don't intervene soon, she could compromise the entire project. Intervention level? Full integration, same as the others. We've prepared a suitable family placement for her. The process can begin tomorrow. I felt sick. Whatever they'd done to Jessica, to all the missing kids, they were planning to do to me. I climbed back up to Jessica's window, my hands shaking so badly I nearly fell twice. Inside, Jessica was still asleep, but now I could see what I'd missed before. The slight scar along her hairline, barely visible unless you knew to look for it. The way her facial features didn't quite match the family photos scattered around the house. This girl sleeping next to me wasn't my friend Jessica. She was someone else entirely, someone who'd been through the same integration process. They were planning for me. And somewhere, the real Jessica Henderson was either gone or had become someone else entirely, placed with a different family, given different memories, living a different life without any awareness of what had been done to her. This is the climax. Everything you've been waiting for is right here. Stay to see the hero put everyone in their place. I knew I had to get out, but the house was locked down like a fortress, and my phone had no signal, probably due to the same jamming technology I'd seen evidence of in the office. But I'd also seen the security system's control panel near the front door. If I could get downstairs and disable it, maybe I could escape and get help. I picked the bedroom lock using a bobby pin, a skill I'd learned from YouTube videos I'd never thought would be useful. The hallway was dark, but I could navigate by memory from the term Mrs. Henderson had given me. The security panel was more complex than I'd hoped, but I could see it was currently in internal monitoring mode rather than full lockdown. I had maybe a 10-minute window before the system automatically switched to maximum security at 4 a.m. I was trying to figure out the disarm sequence when I heard movement upstairs. "Alex?" Jessica's voice, sleepy and confused. "Where are you?" I heard her bedroom door open, heard her calling for me with increasing concern. Within moments, the entire house was stirring. Footsteps, voices, the sound of doors opening throughout the building. They knew I was missing. I abandoned the security panel and ran for the front door, but it was electronically locked and wouldn't budge. The back door, same thing. Windows, all sealed with what looked like reinforced glass. "Alex, honey, where are you?" Mrs. Henderson's voice, but now it carried an edge of authority that hadn't been there during dinner. "We just want to make sure you're safe." I heard them moving through the house systematically, checking each room. Professional, organized, like they'd done this before. I hid in the pantry, but I knew it was only a matter of time. As footsteps approached the kitchen, I realized I had one chance. The garbage disposal unit under the sink created enough noise to mask movement, and there was a service entrance to the basement that might not be monitored as closely. The basement was unfinished, with concrete walls and exposed pipes. But it also had a root cellar entrance that led to an exterior storm door, the kind of old-fashioned access point that might not be wired into the modern security system. I could hear them searching the main floor above me, their voices coordinated like a tactical team. Whatever operation this was, it was far more sophisticated than a simple kidnapping. The storm door was secured with an old padlock that I managed to break using a crowbar from the workbench. Fresh air hit my face as I emerged into the backyard, but I was still inside the security perimeter. Motion sensors tracked my movement as I ran toward the fence, but I'd noticed during my earlier reconnaissance that there was a gap in coverage near the northeast corner where tree branches blocked some of the cameras. I made it over the fence just as floodlights illuminated the entire backyard. Behind me, I could hear doors opening, voices shouting coordinates, the sound of vehicles starting. They were coming after me. I ran through the woods behind Jessica's neighborhood, my bare feet torn by rocks and branches, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Behind me, I could hear search teams spreading out, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. I made it to the main road and flagged down the first car I saw, an elderly man driving home from a late shift. He took one look at my condition and drove me straight to the police station. But when the police went to investigate the Henderson house 3 hours later, they found it empty. Not just vacant, completely empty, as if no one had ever lived there. No furniture, no personal belongings, no evidence that a family had been living there for years. The neighbors insisted they'd never seen any Hendersons. The house had been empty for months, they said, for sale by a property management company that no longer seemed to exist. There was no record of Jessica Henderson at our school. No enrollment forms, no academic records, no evidence that any student by that name had ever attended. But I knew she'd been real. I had photos of us together on my phone, text message conversations, shared memories of classes and teachers and events. Except when I checked my phone, those photos were gone. The text conversations had vanished. Even my own memories seemed fuzzy, like trying to recall a dream that's slipping away. The police treated me kindly but clearly thought I'd had some kind of breakdown. Stress, they suggested. Overactive imagination. Maybe I'd been sleepwalking and gotten confused. But I knew what I'd seen. And 3 weeks later, when I got a friend request on social media from someone named Jessica Martinez, whose profile photo showed the same girl I'd known as Jessica Henderson but with different hair and clothes, I knew the program was still running. She sent me a message. "Do I know you? You look really familiar. Want to hang out sometime?" I stared at the message for a long time before blocking the account. Sometimes I wonder how many of my friends are real. How many of the people I've known throughout my life were actually someone else, placed in my vicinity as part of some larger experiment or operation. And sometimes, late at night, I wonder if the memories I have of my own family, my own childhood, my own identity, are as real as I think they are. The scariest part isn't what they did to Jessica, or what they plan to do to me. The scariest part is not knowing if they succeeded. Thanks so much for watching. I can't express enough how much your support means. The likes, the comments, it all really helps the channel grow. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. I always take the time to read them. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss out on any new videos. See you next time.